Welcome back to America's Fractured Politics. Today I've got with me Richard Gross and Keith Bumgarner, two good friends and two great Substackers. We've done one of these before, and we're really looking forward to doing this one today. So we're going to kick it off with the Epstein files. This is something that's hanging over Donald Trump's head and frankly hanging over the nation's head. So I'm going to kick it to Keith first to kind of give us some background about it from his perspective and what it means for Donald Trump, for Congress, and for the country. Keith?
Well, as we know, the Transparency Act was passed by Congress, and the deadline is coming on December the 19th to release the files. I think one of the most interesting things that's happened in the past day is that the Epstein survivors have gathered together and they have publicly backed Senator Wyden's bill to force the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, to hand over Epstein's banking records. Now, the significance of this is the fact that, they can spend these memories any way they want to, but it's going to be extremely difficult to spend financial data. If this data actually ever does see daylight, we're going to learn who subsidized this operation and just how many regulators and bank personnel were involved in the thing. And, the next best thing about that is obviously that some of these bankers or regulators, they may be able to flip them. I'm not sure if any of them, want to go to prison just to save Donald Trump's ass.
Yeah.
I think also too, I think a lot of this is going to fall back on a lot of the Republicans. Now, I think that the politically clean and smart Republicans are going to be the ones that are going to say something like, well, release everything, including the bank records. If any of us are in there, the public deserves to know. And the ones hiding behind privacy and process are probably the ones that are telling on themselves. So, essentially, if you're clean, you want daylight. If you're dirty, you want redactions. And that's probably the simplest test going on in Washington right now.
I've got a basic question, and it is that he has done innumerable things over the years, just a million different things, and none of them have done him in. What's your thought on whether this one can or not?
Well, I don't think that we're talking about a silver bullet here, but I do think, however, that there may be information there is definitely going to corroborate patterns. Who flew, who paid, who helped keep this quiet. I also think that there's a grotesque aspect to this. We're talking about pedophiles. We're talking about people raping children. You can go on and on all you want to about him talking about a war hero like John McCain and so forth, or making fun of a disabled individual or whatever. But now we're talking about pedophiles, and we're talking about men in power who rape children. And I've got a funny feeling there's a whole lot of people, Congress people and Republicans, that are not going to, they're not going to let that slide.
Obvious question. Are we going to see these files?
I think we're going to see some form or version of them. The one thing that I do know is that these files exist in a lot of different places. They exist in the federal court system. They exist in people who've been authorized to hold certain segments of these files. They're in so many different locations that if we don't see what we need to see from one source, I think we're likely going to be able to tap multiple other sources, and eventually I think we're going to get the whole story. There is no way in the world that these can be redacted or these can be trashed or burned or whatever you want to, whatever, from just a single source. It just isn't going to work.
I sort of have a feeling that the Epstein estate files may be the Rosetta Stone.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah, we may get more out of them than we'll get out of the Justice Department.
Yes.
Rich, talk about Congress. What's your thought about how this is going to affect Congress? The way they've handled it, what they're likely to do if Trump is exposed?
Yeah, so I think the calculus for Republican members of Congress are kind of completely different than it is for Trump himself. I think for a lot of these lawmakers, Trump isn't just some sort of political figure. I think he's essentially become the gateway to their own political survival. But I agree with Keith. I think the moral weight of this particular issue isn't, just about some sort of like tax policy or some sort of regulatory dispute. I think we're talking about Jeffrey Epstein here, to Keith's point. We're talking about someone who was convicted of soliciting prostitution from a minor, and there's, obviously incredible allegations of the sex trafficking. So there should be, you would think, a moral line in the sand here. But I honestly, I feel like the brutal reality here is even on an issue this serious, Republican members of Congress are making a survival calculation. They're asking themselves, for example, if I push for these files to be released against Trump's wishes, are my constituents back home going to reward me for standing on principle, or will they see me as betraying the president and primarying me out of office? And I'd like to have more faith in our Republican leaders that they would do the right thing. But I think we've seen more than often that it's the latter. So does that make it right? Absolutely not. But I think there's a strong argument, when you're talking about, crimes against children and sex trafficking, there should be, some sort of moral clarity here. But the Republican Party, their identity is so intertwined with Trump that even issues that would traditionally be a third rail, things that are morally non-negotiable topics, are sometimes filtered through this lens of loyalty. And I think it's really troubling for a governance principle perspective that it suggests that there are very few issues where principle would override some sort of political self-preservation. And I guess I would just say that the one caveat I have, if there was something that was clear and undeniable, some sort of damning evidence that became public, then you might see Republicans suddenly discover their courage, not because their principles changed, but because their political winds did. And I know that sounds cynical, but it's also consistent with the behavior that we've been observing.
About to say there's nothing consistent about it at all. So it's just exactly what they are.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts on this?
Well, it occurs to me too that, Trump, he ran on a platform of protect the children, and MAGA has always been they have always been, out there with an outcry, where are the Epstein files, blah, 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 blah. Now, it could be that their entire expectation is it's going to be nothing but Democrats in these files, but they have been screaming for the Epstein files for a long time. And I think if you look at Marjorie Taylor Greene, there is some reason why this woman is backing off and backing away. And I don't know the whole story, but I've got to believe that somehow, some way, these Epstein files have got something to do with it. And I think even the likes of a Marjorie Taylor Greene is not willing to allow the stain of the rape of small children to be, applied to her.
I think you're right. I think one of the other things is that there are other congressmen who feel the same way, but who haven't come out of the closet yet. And I think,
absolutely.
Yeah. And I think until we see something, we won't know. But something explosive.
I think you have to, something that could actually move the needle on the supporters, it would have to be something that directly contradicts something MAGA supporters deeply care about, not just some sort of general morality, but specific values that they saw Trump as championing. And I think it would also be something that would have to be undeniable and possible to spin as some sort of fake news or political motivation. And I think that it would also have to create some real tangible consequences for supporters' own lives that they could directly trace back to Trump himself. I think then you start to see, the floor start to move, and then the cracks start to broaden.
Absolutely. Now, one thing I've heard, Mark, is, and maybe this is, I don't know how unusual this is in an election cycle, but I understand that there are more than 30 Republican congresspersons who are considering or already talking about resigning in this cycle.
37 have announced their resignations, counting Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Excuse me?
37 have announced their resignations, and that includes Marjorie Taylor Greene.
37. Okay. Now, is that an unusual for a cycle? It sounds to me like a significantly high number.
It's a very high number.
Yeah. I think that's very telling.
It is telling. It gives you a good idea of what people are looking at, because they're basically looking at the possibility of going down with Donald Trump or being primaried by Donald Trump, and both are really unappetizing alternatives.
Right. And that's what I was saying, is that, you have Republicans going outside their door every single morning and checking which way the wind is blowing. And, if it's not political, they're all about political preservation at this point. So if they see that the winds are changing and it's not looking good to hook yourself up to Donald Trump's wagon, they're going to go ahead and start, bailing or going the other way and calling for the full release of these files very, very, in a very, 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 strong way,
Absolutely.
Let's flip to another repulsive subject, Pete Hegseth. Pete Hegseth is
Whiskey Pete.
Yeah, Whiskey Pete.
The fog of booze.
Exactly. There is a seeming intention on the part of Hegseth now to try to throw Admiral Frank Bradley under the bus. So Bradley's going to be meeting with Congress fairly soon, and it'll be very interesting to see what he says. Who gave the order, whether or not he acted on his own, whether Hegseth said kill them all, as has been reported, whether this came as a directive from even higher. We don't know any of that right now, but I think we will know it.
Well, was it Admiral Halsey? Am I pronouncing that name correctly? Halsey, who was previous command. It appears now there seems to be the fact that he is going to be called into a hearing, and of course he was the one who refused to follow what he considered an illegal order. I think we may know more about this and hear more about this from his testimony, if that comes about, than anything that we might hear from the admiral who's in place right now.
It's a good point. We may hear something from him, and it may differ from what we're going to hear from Bradley.
Yes.
My sense on Hegseth is that he's in hot water, and I think there's already like a sense that maybe that Trump may be kind of distancing himself. Of course, there's going to be some effort by Hegseth to go ahead and say that apparently he wasn't in the room at the time, but that's a really, really difficult thing to believe, because I think he was, the person at the time who was executing the orders, if I'm not mistaken. And this whole thing about the fog of war, I think that, this is a metaphor, the fog of war, but I think Pete Hegseth thinks it's actually a literal thing where, he couldn't see. Either way, any way you slice it, this is not a good argument here, because if you're killing survivors that have no quarter, that are lost in the ocean, and you order a second strike, a double tap, is the term, that is a crime against humanity. And that's in a war situation, but there's no pretense here that we're actually in a war. So this is just outright right. This is just murder when you look at it that way.
Well, Richard, if it is, but here's the thing: if the administration or Hegseth wants to say that this is a quote unquote non-international armed conflict with cartels, for example, once that ship was shipwrecked via combat, the law of war protections kick in. Deliberately killing survivors at that point is essentially the textbook definition of a war crime. Right. But on the flip side of that, if the administration now says, oh, well, we weren't in an armed conflict, then domestic law applies. And you're talking about conspiracy to commit murder under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. They've got themselves painted into a corner either way on either side of this coin from a legal perspective.
So they're right. Damned if they do and they damned if they don't.
Yeah, I wrote a piece today and said the same thing.
In that situation.
Yeah, exactly. Richard, what do you think about the whole process of killing people in the middle of the Caribbean for no reason except for the fact that you suspect that they're narco-terrorists?
Right. So there is no evidence, right? And I think that's one of the biggest things. There's been absolutely the administration has shown absolutely no public evidence that there was any actual cartel members. Governments and families of the victims are saying that many of them were just fishermen. And I think there's a lot of UN human rights experts that are calling these, extrajudicial executions. And using lethal force in international waters without any kind of legal process, without trials, without even showing a bit of evidence that these people were who they claim the administration claims that they were. And I just want to say this is really a departure from historically how these kinds of counter narcotic things have happened. So for decades, the approach was to stop vessels, arrest people, seize cargo because you wanted intelligence. You want to understand the networks. You want to follow the money, dismantle the organizations. When you kill people, you can't talk to them. You're giving up all that intelligence value for what? And it's really just a body count that may not even include the people that you say that you're targeting. So this is a big deal. This is implications that are very serious, and there's a lawlessness that this administration is doing these acts. They're saying they're making up things to go ahead and justify their position, and this is a real concern because trying to get a hold of the constraints on this government, to constrain them is a very, very difficult thing because, we're not a member of the ICC. And I think that creates a whole set of problems itself because even if the ICC went ahead and investigated these things, these actions, there's a very good possibility that the United States is not going to go ahead and, go through them or follow through with it. They're going to go ahead and deny them or work against them. So this is a tricky situation. But I think when you have like a buildup of 4,500 troops, you have the aircraft carriers and things of that nature. This is not an attempt to go ahead and stop narcotics. This is like, I think, a lead up to go ahead and try to establish some sort of pretense for war. And I think that's in Venezuela, exactly. Yeah. And so I think that's the bigger issue.
Well, but Richard, even given the fact that we're not an ICC member state,
yep.
I think the way that plays is that if you commit these crimes either in the territorial waters or on the land of a country or state that is an ICC member, then all ICC stuff applies as if even as if we were an ICC member. Now, I'm not sure about Venezuela. Do either of you know whether Venezuela is a member state?
They are.
If they are, and this was in the territorial waters of Venezuela, then it's just as if we were ICC member states.
Yeah, and I agree with that. But I think the reality is that the U.S. would never cooperate. I think Trump's executive orders he's blocking property and assets of the ICC officials, and he's banning their families from entering the United States. The U.S. government has even sanctioned ICC judges and prosecutors. So I think that there is definitely a reason for investigation, but I think that the U.S. forces committed, they don't I think they just are going to not cooperate with this whole investigation. And when you're dealing with the most powerful country in the world, that's a hard thing to do. But as far as the investigation, I wholeheartedly believe that there needs to be investigations into this by the ICC. And I do think it creates a historical framework that, we're no longer on the moral ground here like the United States has, claimed to be for years and years and years and decades.
Well,
but we also have Hegseth them talking about a double tap and blah, 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 blah.
Correct.
And, if you think back, I think it was 2002 or 2003 when we mistakenly shot down a plane in the Peruvian jungle, which we thought, contained, I don't know if it was drug cartel or whatever was involved, but as it turned out, it was an American missionary and his family. Now, that was blamed on just simply faulty intelligence. And of course, we didn't hear, in the news and from other sources that, oh my God, this is, double tap strike, or fog of war, or so forth. So I think you've got Hegseth talking about this double tap, which is insane because double tap would imply that they knew exactly what they were going to do and that they were going to kill those remaining survivors. That's the second tap in double tap. So there's just so much out there publicly about this. Plus, you've got a Fox News contributor already saying that Hegseth is probably guilty of a war crime. You've got
Yep.
a Newsmax host saying that Hegseth is probably guilty of a war crime. So all these things are creating some kind of critical mass here that I'm not sure the administration can get around this one.
There's
Love
another
to see
issue too.
accountability. I would
Yeah.
love to see the accountability.
There's
Yeah.
another issue here too, and that is that we have set up a standard that will allow other countries to do this to us if they so choose.
Absolutely. China,
Oh,
Russia,
yeah, that's the
whoever.
real danger.
Yeah.
That's the absolute danger.
It is. Let's talk more about the expansion of military activity. We talked about Venezuela, the possibility that he wants to go in and seize the oil. And I think that's a distinct possibility because that's the way he operates. But we've also had this, and this has not been talked about as much lately. It was a few weeks ago, about going into Nigeria to save Christians. Now, I wonder if he knows that those Christians are black people, but he probably doesn't. And who knows? Anyway,
That's
Thoughts?
that's a really good point, though.
Thoughts?
Make a difference.
Yeah.
What do y'all think?
Well, actually, I think he has no. I think that's a smokescreen. I don't think he gives a rat. Excuse me. Doesn't care about Christians in any regard, whether they're black or white. And actually, Nigerian civil groups have explicitly urged their victims to actually seek justice through the ICC rather than accepting or endorsing any kind of U.S. military intervention. So I think there's things in play there, but I really don't understand Trump's play here at all. Maybe the Christian thing he thinks appeals to his base. I don't know, but there's something real shaky, even shakier about this than typical with some of Trump's stuff that I haven't fully understood yet.
I had heard, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I heard that this whole thing had started with going into Nigeria was because that Trump apparently saw a segment on Fox News about Christian persecution in Nigeria, and like within an hour he was laser focused on the issue and posting about it, and that's how this whole thing started.
That
Do
is
you know
correct.
if that's accurate?
That is
That is
accurate.
correct.
That is accurate.
So-
He does this all the time, by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
this is the flavor of the day. And, the problem is that, and I looked this up, there's actually data that tells a much more complicated story than just Christians being, slaughtered, according to Trump. According to the Armed Conflict Location Event Data Program, between January 20th and September 2025, there were 385 attacks against Christians that resulted in 317 deaths, but also 417 Muslim deaths occurred in 196 attacks where religion was a factor. So
He doesn't care about those.
and he doesn't care about that. But the thing is that a lot of these are Nigerian officials are pointing out that groups like Boko Haram, Boko Haram, they don't discriminate. They bomb markets, they bomb churches, they bomb mosques, they attack every civilian location they find. This isn't a genocide targeting Christians. It's just terrorism affecting everybody. But Trump looks through the prism here and makes, this as I said, the crisis of the day.
Well, he figures it'll get him support from his Christian constituents.
Absolutely. That's
He's
the
trying to
plan.
prove-
That's
he's
the,
still trying
that's
to
the
prove-
play.
He's still trying to.
Well, and you've
Christians
got to
are
remember
fetus.
too, Nigeria produces just a little less than 2 million barrels of oil a day,
Yeah.
and they're a member of OPEC.
Another consideration.
And
And it's
Nigeria.
possible, Trump
ahead.
possibly thinks that Nigeria is a Scandinavian country.
That's possible too.
Those
Um,
socialists.
Wouldn't surprise me. Let's switch gears. Let's talk about corruption. And boy, is there a lot to talk about. First, I have an issue around corruption. Why is Jared Kushner, in violation of the Logan Act, involved in these negotiations with Russia over Ukraine? It's a rhetorical question, obviously, but what the hell is he doing there? And we know nothing's going to be done about it because the administration's not going to prosecute Jared Kushner. But it's a violation of the Logan Act. And to me, it's just yet another brick in the wall of violations of corruption. I mean, he's in this for Russian money. We know that. That's what he's looking for. So what are your thoughts about, the ballroom, the tearing down of the East Wing, the Gatsby Party, the crypto scams. What are your thoughts about all of these?
Well, I mean, this this really starts to cover an awful lot of ground. One, um, the so-called donors, for the ballroom. I mean, all this is really is just effectively buying influence. It's lobbying at a high level. Um, Congress now thinks that they're going to expand the investigation of looking at this thing and so forth and so forth. And in fact, I've even read some reports from architects and so forth. In fact, the primary architect that Trump employed has now quit, saying that there is no way, it is not possible, it is not physically possible to build this ballroom based on where he wants to build it from structural supports and so forth and so forth. So I think all we're going to really end up with is a huge, mess of demolition, right there, for someone else to clean up. But it's just, I don't know. Seeing him rip that East Wing apart and knowing that, this isn't his right to do this. That is indeed the people's house. It is the taxpayers' money that maintains that place. And he just went out and got a demo crew to take the thing down. And again, how it's getting paid for, because, these people know that if they're contributing and they're a donor to this project, that they're going to buy, influence with Trump. And that's, the whole thing is trying to, have Trump on your good side, to have Trump doing things for you, et cetera, et cetera. But the whole thing is just, I don't know, it's almost too much for me to think about when I start trying to break it down into details and so forth. It's just a nightmare for myself.
Nobody will say no to this man. Nobody.
No. Absolutely.
I think that also it's interesting too, because, when this was going on, I think there was a poll back in October that Americans opposed this construction by 56%, and there was 45% that strongly opposed it. So there's genuine opposition here in this in this demolition job that he's doing. And to your point, Mark, nobody is saying no to this. He just apparently just called up a contractor saying, I'm going to knock down a few walls. And it turns out the whole East Wing is history. And, again, to both of your points, this is the people's house. And he had no right to be able to do this. And, building this construction, this ballroom, whatever it is, 300 million or whatever it's supposed to come to, there's a part of me that just thinks like he's planning on using this for a lot longer than 4 years. And,
Since it's
that's
not
also
finished until the 28th.
Right. Yeah. So that's just it, is like, this is not a overnight construction job. This is a big deal. And it doesn't seem like he's ever planning on moving out of the White House. And I think that's kind of an underlining messaging that I'm getting a little bit.
Yeah.
And I would love to see, Democrats, come back in, whether or not it's a good idea to just go ahead and tear down a ballroom and reconstruct an East Wing again. I think symbolically that would mean something. But I would like to also maybe potentially see it, repurposed into something that's for the good of the people rather than a symbol of decadence and waste, which is what it's going to be right now.
I don't think they could do anything to that building. It's a mess. My personal opinion is tear down the ballroom, rebuild the East Wing, and seize Trump's assets to pay for it.
Yeah. And, I'm not sure. And Richard, to your point about, he thinks he's going to be there for a while. I know even my wife says, hey, well, he's building the ballroom because he thinks he's never going to leave the White House. But, Trump does not see past the end of his nose. How many times, and we just talked about it a few minutes ago, he sees something on television, this is something he wants to do, and then he's off of it. I think this, on a little grander scale, may be exactly one of those very things. I mean, he got the hots to build this ballroom, and he's torn it down. Now he's got architects telling him, my gosh, we can't build what it is that you want to build here, and so forth and so forth. And I think if he gets enough resistance like that, I think he'll be off of this and on to the next disaster. I mean, it just seems to be his pattern.
It's insane. It's exhausting. And, it's...
Oh, God, it's exhausting.
All exhausted.
Costco has now sued Trump over the tariffs, and the Supreme Court has yet to weigh in. What are your thoughts? How is this going to end up? Is the Supreme Court going to sustain him, or are they going to shoot him down?
Well, I think a lot has to do with the Supreme Court, and I'm not sure why they have not necessarily weighed back in on this question yet. Um, you know, these tariffs are they're killing the farmers, they're killing small businesses, they're hurting everybody. And these bridge payments that Trump has announced to try to appease the farmers and so forth, you can't just keep doing things like this. I mean, they've allowed Argentina and Brazil to now come into the markets that we once dominated in regards to our contracts to sell soybeans to China. And now 40% of anything and everything that we have ever done, it has now already been taken over by Brazil, and Argentina is probably going to fill in the rest of that. Now, once China's dealing with those two countries, how difficult is it going to be for our farmers to get those contracts back? I think it's going to be extremely difficult. I think Trump has literally possibly wiped out an entire generation of farm productivity or farm profits for either the families or corporations that own these particular farms. I think that's the real tragedy of this, and I think it's impacting the farm industry maybe more than it is anything else.
And it's a folly because he doesn't know anything about tariffs and doesn't understand how they work. And yet he's
of course not. He doesn't have a clue what a tariff is.
No.
Still doesn't.
No, he still doesn't. The other issue with the tariffs is that Costco wants their money back. And I'm not sure how that's going to work, but I can see other companies doing the same thing and demanding reparations from the government. And that can be really interesting.
Yeah. I think you're going to see other people follow suit, especially if if there might be some success from the Costco thing. But I think it still goes back to, when is the Supreme Court going to rule on this? Or are they going to just simply throw it back and say that the lower court ruling is going to stand?
They could do that, or they could do that now if they wanted to. I don't understand why they're holding off. It's an important issue.
Yeah, I don't understand the stall here.
I think there has been some sort of indication that the Supreme Court is not all that in alignment with the Trump tariffs. I think there's been some indications of that. Have there not?
There have been. Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah.
So do it.
So yeah, so pull the trigger on that, because I think that would. I don't know why there's a delay on this. I think the sooner the better, and and everyone's feeling the pinch of these tariffs, like we're talking about, especially with the soybean farmers and the beef farmers that are out there too. It's really hurting their livelihood tremendously, and as I say, it could be for decades that this could happen, or years and years at least.
Let's talk about the politics of this. We had an election yesterday where the Democratic candidate in Tennessee 7 lost by 9 points in a district that Trump won last year by 22 points. This is just one in a string of defeats that the Republicans have sustained. My personal opinion, having spent years in politics, is that if they don't reverse course and do something to restore confidence in the American people, that they're doing something to deal with inflation, to deal with affordability, even though he doesn't believe it's a word, and to deal with the tariffs, by April, everything is going to be set in stone. And I don't think it's going to be very easy to get the American people to change their minds before the November elections. And April's not that far off.
So, Mark, when you say set in stone, you mean in terms of what the government has policies that they've put out,
No, people's attitudes.
People's attitudes. Okay.
Yeah. If they turn on them, they're going to stay turned on them if it continues into April or May.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's true. I think there's some merit to that argument. We're seeing some real movement in the last November election in terms of Democrats making moves. I think Tennessee, yesterday's, it was a loss, for the Democrats, but it was only like about 7 or 8 point difference. And, the fact that it was single digits, I think, is really, really a very, very significant indicator, because this is a heavily gerrymandered Republican district that, I think, to what you just said, Trump won by 22 points in the election. And so I think that, we're seeing, this movement, bit by bit. And I'm going to say that if Republicans didn't win their seats by 14 points, from the last election, that they should be sweating at this point in time.
They are sweating. The RNC and the senatorial and the congressional arms are in a panic right now, according to what I'm hearing.
No, I think so. And, every time Democrats, they get out there and they run on health care, they run on rent, food, and energy costs, they are performing extremely well. But every time they drift back to some of their consultant mush, they start to underperform. And the voters are grading clarity and courage, not centrism. They do not want a centrist view, perspective on the politics right now.
They want affordability dealt with. They want concerns dealt with. They want people who demonstrate clearly and convincingly that they care about them. They care about their day-to-day worries. They care about their lives and their futures. And if Democrats can do that, then they'll win. And Democrats who don't do that are going to go down.
Which is why we've got to get rid of all this Jeffries and Schumer crap. It almost seems to be an appeasement type of effort on the part of those two and some other leaders in the Democratic Party. They have simply got to get out there and hawk. They have got to hawk on health care, rent, food, and energy cost, and making life better for just the average Joe.
Here's the problem.
Yeah.
Over 150 Democrats are taking money from special interests, including major corporations. And as long as that remains the case, they're going to pull punches because they don't want to do anything to antagonize them. And a lot of these corporations are supporting Donald Trump. So there's a conflict of interest here between Schumer and Jeffries and the American people and other members of Congress who don't believe that. And until that gets resolved, we need public financing of elections, and that's not going to happen right away. But it has to happen long term if any of these problems are to be solved.
And I think that's why you have like, someone like Mamdani, who won the election in New York, making strides because, these are progressive issues. AOC, is another person who speaks, to the people. These are not your Schumers and your Jeffries and all that. And I think these are, where the direction needs to go in terms of more of these kinds of leaders and politicians with progressive thoughts, And I'll just say this, I think the Democrats have a real opportunity here, but they need to be smart about how they frame it. And honestly, they haven't really been all that great about that in the past. And I think that the core message, Keith, you were talking about like healthcare and things like that. I think with messaging, I don't think you lead with, things like Affordable Care Act marketplace subsidies and things like that. I think that you lead with like your health insurance is about to go up $500 a month, or the plan that covers your kid's asthma medication is about to become unaffordable. You have to make it concrete. You have to make it hurt. And, you have to make sure that you point to the Republicans that they're the ones who had a choice and they decided to to put you in this position. So you have to make them own it so that when Republicans go back to their constituents, they have to explain themselves.
Exactly. And I think in the past, Democrats have really asked the voting population to intellectualize these things. And just as you've clearly pointed out just then, Richard, we've got to make it about things that affect them directly. And when you get into someone's pocketbook, hey, that's when you start to hit home.
Yep, you're right. And the ACA subsidies, exactly. And most of the candidates that have run so far have been on message. And so if they remain that way, that's really good news. There's another issue here, and that is there is a tragedy and an opportunity in the ACA subsidies. I do not believe the Republicans are going to vote for them. I think the members of the House are so against Obamacare, viscerally against Obamacare, that they cannot bring themselves to vote for the subsidies. So even if they pass the Senate, they won't pass the House. And I don't know whether Trump would sign it anyway. If that's the case and those premiums go up in January, we can't do anything to help those people. But what will happen is they're going to pay for it in a big way. Because once those bills go out in January, there will be no forgiving.
There will be a reckoning. There will be a reckoning.
No, there absolutely will be. And again, I hate that it's going to impact and affect so many people in that particular regard. But unfortunately, it seems like this is what it's going to take to get people to wake up and realize, these Republicans, they're not doing one damn thing for me, not one thing for me.
No,
Well,
and I would say, are they that they're not doing anything for MAGA either?
No. Well,
The
that's what I'm
people.
saying. And in fact, I think if you scratch the surface real hard with MAGA, you're going to find an awful lot of them that are on ACA. And in fact, I would venture that a large percentage of them do not even know that the reference to Obamacare is talking about the ACA.
right.
I don't think they know that they're the same thing.
No, I don't
Absolutely
think they
not.
do either. They've done polling before that suggests that that's the case, that they do not
Yeah.
know.
You were saying I don't want Obamacare, but I wanted the ACA. Sorry.
Well, it's like Congressman Bob Inglis of South Carolina some years back went to a town hall in his district, and they were talking about Social Security. And one guy came in, stuck his finger in his face, and screamed at him and said, "Keep your goddamn government hands off my Social Security."
Yeah.
That about says it all.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sure.
So
Absolutely.
I mean, you need those premiums to go up before anybody realizes what they're into. But it's terrible.
Yeah,
when that happens.
I hate to say it. To your point, Keith, you have to. There has to be pain for there to be change.
Yeah, I know. And I
It's
hate it
sad.
so much for those people.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean, it
it's
upsets me
terrible.
deeply. I wish they'd pass. I would rather lose the issue than have these people lose their insurance. But I don't think
Absolutely.
it's going to
Exactly.
shake out that way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, any
And it's
final thoughts?
interesting too because research actually shows that Democrats are voters are more supportive of compromise than Republican voters, but Democratic lawmakers feel more pressure from their constituents to make government work to alleviate hardship. Kind of be the adults in the room, where Republicans don't have that sense of obligation. I don't think.
No, they don't.
Oh, no. I mean, frankly, because I think they really don't care about anybody but literally themselves and what enriches them.
We're bumping up against the magic period where listeners stop listening anymore. So, I'm going to ask for final thoughts about any issue that we didn't talk about. I know there were some that we wanted to talk about that we didn't get to. So, here's the chance to maybe throw out some thoughts about some of the other issues that we didn't talk about.
Well, I think I'd like to, if I'm going to have a parting shot here, I'd like to say one thing. We can have a government that works for 330 million people, or we could have a government that works for one man and his partners in crime. And I think that's going to ultimately be the real ballot question, whether you're looking at Project 2025 or Bondi's DOJ or a $300 million ballroom built on the rubble of the people's house. The question will finally be, do you want a government for 330 million people or for one guy and his partners in crime?
All said. Richard?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I can say anything more clearly than that. I think we're seeing, as I mentioned earlier in the podcast, that we're seeing a lot of cracks that are starting to form, and I see that we're seeing momentum shift slowly, but consistently. I think Democrats, as we just talked about, have to be clear on their messaging, and if they're clear on the messaging, I think that they'll have a good turnout and a good results in 2026 that could essentially stop this Trump presidency and this tyranny from happening. I think I'll just say this is that there's been a lot of damage that's been done in less than a year, and some of it can just be reversed pretty easily when we have a new Democratic administration, but some of it is going to be lasting. And it's going to take a very long time, if not decades, with certain things. So the damage has been really done, and I think we just hopefully will be able to stop the bleeding. But I believe that it's turning that way. That's my hope, and that's my firmly belief.
My concluding thought is that this is going to start declining for Trump fairly quickly, and Hegseth is sort of kicking that off. I think there is a point where we're going to reach critical mass and the decline will become more rapid. The ACA subsidies are going to kick in and the effects of the tariffs are going to continue. People are going to start to get upset about the fact that they can't afford to pay for things. And sooner or later, we're going to find that people have hardened in their beliefs, and that should be sometime mid next year. And once that happens, it's going to be very hard for the Republicans to recover. So I kind of foresee a demolition of the Republican majority in the House and a possible retake of the Senate, although that'll be a little tougher. Where it goes from there, I think you're going to have subpoenas. You're going to have another impeachment, a third impeachment. And Trump is going to be very busy fending off investigations for the rest of his term. I do not believe that he is going to be able to run for a third term. I don't think there will be any support for it. I think Congress and the public will have turned on him by then. So his ballroom is not going to be used. I think it'll ultimately be torn down. And I firmly believe that the thing ought to be torn down, the East Wing rebuilt, and his assets be seized to pay for it. But that's a digression. I want to thank all of you for joining us today. I want to thank both Richard and Keith. I hope you take the time to listen to the whole thing. I think it was very informative listening to both of them. So let's keep the dialogue going on Substack, and please tune into the next podcast. I'll look forward to hearing from you all. Love your input. Certainly love more subscribers and more comments. So until next time, thank you very much.